On the old trail behind Burger King, where once only the wind and lonely footsteps echoed, a silver-held older man stood motionless. Beside him, an aging dog panted, eyes locked on ahead where a crude wooden sign had just been hastily planted. No old people, no dogs, no freedom. No one knew that a fire was ignited at that moment, one that would silently consume an entire system of power. That morning, the sun had just begun to brush the treetops, its thin rays hanging lazily like mist over the town's low rooftops. On the gravel-strewn path behind Burger King, a man walked steadily, each step quiet but firm. Chuck Norris. An old pair of boots, a faded jacket, and by his side Duke, an elderly golden retriever, patient and calm, matching Chuck's pace with every breath, sinking to the pulse of the earth. No one paid them any mind. No one needed to. To the townsfolk, Chuck was simply the old man who walked his dog every morning, an ordinary piece of their peaceful scenery. The crunch of gravel underfoot, Duke's soft breathing, until a sharp voice sliced through the morning calm like a blade. "Oh man, this path's closed now, turn back." Chuck halted. Not hurried, not raising his head, just a brief pause, as if his breath had touched a deep sember note. Standing before him, a young man in a dark grey security uniform, sunglasses perched despite the mild morning sun. The young man stood, blocking the trail, hands on hips, posturing as if he owned the whole land. "Name's Evan. I work for Security Corp. You need to leave. New orders," he said, his voice dry and commanding. Chuck tilted his head slightly, glancing at Duke. The old dog simply stood, silent, fur trembling slightly in the morning breeze. "There's no sign," Chuck said, his voice low like stone grinding against stone. Evan smirked. "Just didn't get around to putting it up. But trust me, you don't want trouble." A gust of wind carried the scent of cheap cigarettes and motor oil from the young man's jacket. Chuck said nothing. He simply tightened his grip on the leash, signaling Duke to turn back. That afternoon, Chuck sat alone in the familiar corner of Burger King. A steaming cup of black coffee in hand, he gazed through the window at the now empty trail. He had walked many roads, dust-choked desert paths, icy northern airstrips, narrow streets soaked in the stench of gunpowder. But that little trail behind Burger King held a special meaning for him. It represented freedom. The freedom of slow, aimless morning walks, filled with quiet purpose. Duke lay peacefully beneath the table, occasionally glancing up at Chuck, as if to ask, "Why is our path so quiet today?" Chuck gently patted Duke's head and murmured, "Some battles don't need gunfire." The next morning, Chuck returned to the trail, out of pure, unconscious habit. But this time, Evan wasn't alone. Two more men in matching grey uniforms stood at the crossroads, arms folded, blocking the way. No threats, no words. Their mere presence spoke volumes. Chuck looked at them, at the way their hands hovered near their belts, not a welcoming posture. Duke gave a low, almost inaudible growl only Chuck could hear. He knelt, patting Duke softly. "Not yet." Once again Chuck turned and walked away, silently. But deep within him, old flames flickered, the same flames that once burned bright on distant battlefields. Not from fear, not from rage, but because Chuck understood, when the cowardly abused their power, silence, properly wielded, could be the sharpest blade. That night, in the small wooden house by the forest, Chuck opened an old wooden box. Inside were seemingly outdated gadgets. Thumb-sized recorder, a tiny hidden camera disguised as a keychain, a specially modified dog collar for Duke, ordinary looking but containing secrets only Chuck knew. Calmly, methodically, he assembled each piece, his gaze unwavering. "All we need is the truth," Chuck whispered to Duke. Duke's ears twitched lightly, tail wagging gently. Outside, the wind whistled through the trees, carrying an ancient reminder. Justice sometimes waits, but it always arrives. The following morning, Chuck Norris changed nothing. He still walked Duke along the trail behind Burger King, where gravel crunched underfoot, whispering tales of silent battles. But this time Chuck's gaze wasn't on the trees or the sky. He looked deep into the earth itself, as if listening to its heartbeat. In his jacket pocket, a tiny USB drive weighed heavily, not from physical weight, but from what it contained. The truth. That afternoon, Chuck drove his battered old pickup to house number 7, tucked deep in a quiet neighborhood. The man he sought, Tom Rylance, a retired police officer whose life Chuck had once saved during a wildfire. Tom was no longer active, but his reputation for integrity remained untarnished. Chuck sat, placing the USB on the table without a word. Tom understood instantly, his eyes darkening like a sky before a storm. "I'll take care of it," Tom said, his voice low, like a distant drum. No contracts. No promises. Just a handshake. Strong, steady, like men who once stood shoulder to shoulder in the face of death. 3 days later, a tiny post appeared on the local town forum. "Used at Burger King, elderly and pets mistreated." Just a few lines. No photos, no proof, but enough to stir curiosity. People began to remember. "I once saw some guards being rough. Heard shouting near the woods one time. That old man was always kind, and his dog too." Resentment swelled like an underground spring, slowly but irresistibly. At Security Corp's office, Evan crushed a soda can in his hand, anxiety flashing across his face. He could feel it. The air around Burger King had changed. No more silent fear. Now, every glance, every footstep seemed to follow him. "We need to finish that old man," his assistant whispered. Evan nodded grimly. But deep down, he knew it was already too late. That Friday night, when the town slept, Tom and Chuck uploaded a short clip to a local Facebook group. Footage of Evan blocking Chuck. Footage of Duke being shoved. Footage of Evan sprinkling drug-laced food. No commentary, no background music, just raw, unfiltered truth, shot from a low angle, as if seen through Duke's vulnerable, loyal eyes. It must last over 4 years, within 8 hours. 12,000 shares? Desi's works, I said 35,000 views. The post exploded like a tidal wave. The next morning, the local Burger King was flooded with emails and calls. "A veteran. He's a hero. What are you doing?" The mother. "My son played with that dog. We stand with Chuck." An animal rights group. "We demand an immediate investigation." The town newspaper, usually filled with school baseball scores, ran a blazing front-page headline. "Darkness behind Burger King. The truth surfaces." Desperately, Evan's superiors issued a statement. No wrongdoing occurred. It's all a misunderstanding. But when a second clip surfaced, showing Evan shoving Chuck and making clear verbal threats, every excuse fell apart. No one believed them anymore. While public outrage boiled over, Chuck remained steadfast. Walking with Duke every morning. Sipping coffee by the Burger King window. Nodding quietly to familiar faces, faces that now looked at him with deep respect. No speeches. And no banners. Just quiet, immovable presence, like a mountain in a storm. The following week, Tom submitted the full evidence package to the town hall. Drone footage flips, audio recordings of threats, proof that Evan had been paid by his superiors to clear the area. An emergency meeting was convened. There was no other choice. The authorities had to act. The tide of justice had risen. Late at night, Chuck stood on his porch, a mug of cold coffee in hand. Duke lay at his feet, breathing softly, his special collar glinting under the moonlight. In the distance, the flashing red and blue lights of police cars swept across Burger King. A raid was underway. Evan was handcuffed at the very counter where he had once barked orders at others. No applause, no cheers, only a profound silence. The kind of silence that comes when justice is quietly restored, like a town's collective sigh of relief. Chuck bent down and gently patted Duke's head. "We don't have to shout, old friend," he whispered. "We just have to stand firm and let the truth speak for itself." The night breeze carried away the scents of wild grass and dusty roads, along with ancient echoes, the echoes of good people who once stood up, silently but resolutely. By morning, the trail behind Burger King reopened, and Chuck, with Duke at his side, walked it once more, as they always had. The news of Evan Mallory's arrest spread like wildfire through the town. Overnight, the name Chuck Norris, already familiar, became a symbol of steadfast resolve. Local newspapers, once filled with county fairs and bake sale results, now blazed with front-page headlines. Man against power. The old soldier and his loyal dog. Radio stations replayed the story over soft music, their deep voices drawing out the tale like church bells ringing at dawn. Social media platforms are flooded with images of Chuck, not posed or staged, but candid moments of him walking Duke in the misty morning light or sitting quietly by the Burger King window. Chuck refused interviews. He stayed away from cameras. He declined all invitations to speak publicly. He simply continued living his life, simple, humble, as if the raging storm beyond his doorstep had nothing to do with him. 1 week after the arrest, the Regional Internal Affairs Bureau launched a formal investigation into Security Corp and the local Burger King operation. The files cracked open like the first fissure in a seemingly solid wall. Internal reports from 6 months prior revealed Security Corp had been ordered to clean up homeless individuals, elderly pet owners, and even teenagers deemed off-brand. Chuck's drone footage exposed secret meetings where Evan received instant bonuses for every citizen he forcibly removed. A growing list of suppressed incidents, ranging from intimidation to property destruction, came to light. Leading the investigation was a seasoned woman named Rebecca Hanley, her hair peppered with grey. Each day, she personally combed through every recording, every detail. Rebecca summoned Chuck for testimony. In the simple, softly lit interrogation room, the light fell warmly across Chuck's weathered face. Rebecca asked, her voice as gentle as a morning breeze, "Mr. Norris, why didn't you fight back immediately?" Chuck met her gaze, his eyes as steady as a mountain. "If I struck first, they would have had a reason to label me the aggressor. If I waited patiently, the truth would reveal itself." Rebecca nodded slowly. She had interrogated many people, but this was the first time she truly witnessed the devastating power of silent strength. As the investigation widened, hidden figures began to surface. Samuel Price, the local Burger King branch manager, was exposed for signing a private order maintenance contract with Security Corp without proper corporate authorization. Security Corp, it turned out, had a history of violence, lawsuits quietly settled out of court. Even local officials and a few precinct police officers were implicated for turning a blind eye in exchange for personal gain. A tangled web of greed and fear unraveled, strand by strand, under the undeniable weight of evidence. Every evening, in small cafes and farmers' markets, people whispered, "That old man, just by walking, made the whole machine tremble." Duke had made a full recovery. Every morning, Chuck walked Duke down the old trail, now officially recognized by the town as a Freedom Corridor. At the trailhead, a new sign was erected. Freedom Trail, because everyone has the right to walk. No mention of Chuck's name. No logos. Just a quiet reminder, true to how he lived. Each time he passed it, Chuck simply glanced at it once and moved on. No need for recognition. No thirst for glory. The peace inside him was vast enough to cover it all. By late autumn, the trial of Evan Mallory and his co-conspirators commenced. Chuck wore his worn denim jacket and sat in the front row behind the bar. Duke couldn't enter the courthouse, but Chuck often absent-mindedly fingered Duke's old leash, his silent anchor. The trial was brief. The evidence was overwhelming. Witness testimonies, recordings, and videos rendered all defense arguments laughable. When the judge delivered the sentences, Evan Mallory, 6 years in prison without parole. Samuel Price, 2 years probation and a heavy fine. Security cob. Mandatory dissolution, permanently banned from operating in the region. Chuck didn't react. He simply bowed his head, acknowledging a truth that had long since been obvious. When Evan was led out of the courthouse, a small group waited outside. A young boy holding a sign, "I stand with the truth." A veteran raising his cane in silent salute. A mother holding a newborn child. No shouting, no jeering, only steadfast, determined gazes. Chuck slipped away unnoticed, blending into the crowd. He returned home, brewed a mug of hot tea, and sat quietly on his porch, watching the sky turn purple with evening. Duke rested his head on Chuck's foot, breathing steadily. Chuck reached into his pocket and pulled out an old dog tag, the worn collar of Kota, his beloved dog from years past. He brushed his thumb over the nameplate and smiled faintly. "We still remember," he whispered. "For men like Chuck Norris, victory isn't measured by applause. Victory is when the wicked can no longer harm the vulnerable." Winter rolled into the small town, but this year something was different. The wind that blew down the trail behind Burger King now carried the scent of damp earth and new hope. The path, once overrun by fear and injustice, now echoed with the free footsteps of many. An elderly woman walking a tiny dog, smiling warmly at passers-by. A young father teaching his son to ride a bike, their laughter ringing in the crisp air. A group of veterans marching shoulder to shoulder, just like they had on distant battlefields long ago. And Chuck Norris? He remained the same, walking with Duke each morning. But there was something new in his gaze now, a quiet conviction that silence, when used rightly, could change the world. One quiet evening, Chuck sat at his wooden table, steam curling up from a simple ceramic mug. Duke lay asleep at his feet, breathing slowly and even. On the table rested a blank sheet of paper and an old, worn-out ballpoint pen. No one knew how long Chuck sat there. Maybe an hour, maybe a lifetime. Finally, slowly, he wrote down 2 words. The Sentinel. Chuck didn't organize a press conference. Yes? He didn't start flashy fundraising campaigns. He simply began by knocking on doors. To veterans, would you be willing to teach kids how to protect themselves? To craftsmen, would you show them how to repair things to be independent? To homemakers, would you share healthy, frugal cooking skills with the community? No one refused, because when Chuck Norris asked, people didn't hear a request. They heard trust. Within just 3 months, the Sentinel had become an underground network. A small playground built from recycled wood, open for all children. Free break-in life skills classes taught by veterans and volunteers. A little library assembled from donated books, available to anyone who sought knowledge or comfort. Everything was simple. Humble. No grand signs. No loud slogans. Only quiet actions, stitched together by faith in goodness. One winter afternoon, while Chuck was fixing the playground's wooden awning, A shy boy approached him. The boy, about 13, was skinny and wore an oversized jacket. Duke trotted over, sniffed the boy's legs, and then laid his ears flat, his sign of trust. Chuck knelt and asked softly, "Are you lost, son?" The boy shook his head, eyes downcast. "I heard everyone's welcome here." Chuck nodded. "You heard right." The boy burst into tears. Or not loud sobs, just silent streams that ran down his sun-decked cheeks. Chuck didn't press him with questions. He simply placed a firm, gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. In that moment, the boy understood he had found home. The next day, the town learned more about him. His name was Aiden. Abandoned by his parents, Aiden had lived months adrift in parks, surviving cold stares and whispered cruelties. But at the Sentinel, no one asked about his past. They only asked, "What would you like to learn today?" Aiden learned how to fix bicycles, how to care for dogs, how to pitch a tent with just a few scraps of cloth. Each day, his eyes shone a little brighter. Each day, his smile grew a little freer. And Chuck, though he never showed much outward emotion, would sometimes watch Aiden from afar with a look of quiet pride and contemplation. That Christmas, the Sentinel community gathered around a small bonfire. There was no giant Christmas tree, no dazzling lights, just people, stories of old times, and bursts of honest laughter. Aiden approached Chuck, cradling a gift wrapped in newspaper. "I made this for you," he mumbled. Chuck unwrapped it carefully. Inside, a rough, hand-woven keychain made from paracord attached to a small tag scrawled with childish handwriting. "Sentinel, my night watchman." Chuck gripped the gift tightly, saying nothing. Duke pressed his nose against Chuck's leg, as if understanding everything without a word. In that moment, no words were needed. Because sometimes silence itself is the deepest gratitude. As spring arrived, the Sentinel grew. A community garden blossomed into life. Life skills classes doubled in number. Vacant lots behind Burger King transformed into vibrant play areas and youth training spaces. Chuck never claimed to be the founder. He always said, "This belongs to everyone. I just walked a little bit ahead." Each morning, as he walked Duke along the Freedom Trail, Chuck was no longer alone. Other footsteps joined his. Children, laughing. Elderly, chatting. Dogs abounding joyfully. The small trail had become a river of freedom, ever flowing. The sun rose gently behind distant hills, its first rays casting gold across the trail behind Burger King. Chuck Norris, in his faded denim jacket, walked slowly, Duke beside him. Older now, slower, but unwavering. The trail remained the same. What had changed were the new faces. Children playing ball, their laughter rippling through the air. An elderly couple strolling hand in hand. A teenager, his beanie pulled low, snapping photos with a tiny camera, capturing life's simple moments. Chuck paused, tightening his grip on the old leash. Duke looked up at him, his eyes warm. A silent good morning. No one paid them much mind, and that was exactly how Chuck wanted it. To live quietly as a natural part of everything around him. That afternoon, at the Sentinel, the once-forgotten patch of land behind Burger King, life thrived. Survival skills classes were held regularly. A tiny library, made from a repurposed shipping container, opened, free for everyone. Lush vegetable gardens spread, each plot proudly bearing the name of its caretaker. Chuck didn't stand at the front of the classroom. He didn't act as a manager. He simply sat on an old wooden bench beneath a large tree, watching over the children. Aiden, now taller and stronger, is teaching younger kids how to start a campfire. Daisy, once shy, is now confidently explaining first aid techniques to a group of eager listeners. Every time Chuck heard their laughter, every time he saw the light of confidence in their eyes, he would quietly nod, his heart warming like the tea he sipped every morning. One summer evening, as Chuck was fixing the wooden awning of the center, Aidan approached him, clutching a wrinkled envelope. "Can I ask you for a favor?" Aidan said, his voice carrying both hope and fear. Inside the envelope was a letter. A formal invitation for Aidan to join a large community outreach project in the city. The Freedom Seed Program, a project dedicated to helping homeless children. "I'm scared," Aidan admitted, his voice trembling. "I've never left this town before." Chuck placed a firm hand on his shoulder, steady, reassuring, just like he had once steadied fallen comrades on distant marches. "Freedom," Chuck said, "isn't staying where it's safe. Freedom is having the courage to step forward, even when your heart trembles." Aidan looked up, his eyes filling with something he hadn't dared to carry before, faith in himself. A few days later, the entire Sentinel community gathered to send Aidan off. No balloons, no stage, no grand speeches. Just a large circle of people holding hands, sharing silent strength. Chuck stepped forward and handed Aidan an old keychain. The same one Aidan had once made for him, now attached to a new leather tag. Sentinel, Guardian, Sower of Freedom. Aidan hugged Chuck tightly. Duke wagged his tail and nudged Aidan's leg, blessing him in the way only dogs can. No more words were needed. When love is true, it rarely requires speech. That night, Chuck sat alone by a small fire behind his home. Duke dozed beside him, head resting against Chuck's leg. On Chuck's lap rested an old, battered notebook, the pages yellowed and curled by time. He flipped through its contents. Notes from the early days of gathering evidence. Rough sketches of the Sentinel, playgrounds and gardens. Lists of children's names. Those who had found shelter, hope and new beginnings. Every page was a story. Every scrawl was a fragment of soul that Chuck had quietly sown into the world. He remembered not the bloody battles fought on foreign soil, but the quiet, stubborn walks through town, being blocked, insulted, doubted, yet never wavering. And now, looking at the old notebook, Chuck knew it had all been worth it. Years passed. The Sentinel continued to flourish. The children who once learned to ride bikes down Freedom Trail grew up to become teachers, passing on life skills to new generations. Volunteers, caring for the lonely and the aged. Leaders help troubled youth find jobs and second chances. They would infabdad whenever someone asked, "Who started all of this?" They would simply smile and look toward the Freedom Trail. No statues, no plaques, just a quiet, tree-lined path where the very first footsteps had carved a way forward. On his familiar wooden bench, Chuck Norris sat quietly, gazing out toward the trail. Duke, now older and slower, still lay loyally by his side. A little child ran up, cheeks flushed by the spring breeze. "Grandpa," the child chirped, "can you tell me about the first person who walked this path?" Chuck smiled, slowly, a smile filled with quiet pride and endless gentleness. He ruffled the child's hair and answered, his voice soft like leaves rustling in the breeze. Hent wasn't someone who believed he was special. He just believed in small things. One step taken the right way. One handshake given in trust. One promise kept faithfully. And most of all, he believed freedom isn't something others give you. Freedom is something you plant with your own 2 hands every day. The child clutched his hand tightly as if trying to hold on to that invisible treasure. As the sun slipped behind the mountains, its final rays painted the small trail in gold. Chuck Norris rose from the bench. He tied his weathered laces and tightened his grip on Duke's old leash. Duke barked once, weak but determined, and together, as they had done through all the years, they set off down the trail once more, beneath the wide gope sky, with the enduring belief, as long as a single kind heart dares to take the next step, freedom will never die.